Hi folks, Tyler here. Here's what's happening at Canyon View. You know, Whiteout's coming up. It's this thing our high school, middle school kids go up there to Frontier Ranch in Buena Vista. Awesome thing. It's just a little pricey, so our students do this thing called We'll Work for Whiteout. So you know what I thought? I'd get one to do some work for me. You ready to do announcements?
Uh-huh.
Okay, wake me up when you're ready.
We'll do anything for Whiteout, even put up with this. Now, did you know that through the faithful ties of CVVC, we support 10 local missionaries, 9 missionaries throughout the U.S., and 20 missionaries globally? Come visit our missions corner in the lobby. There's a lot to see. You might learn something. And there's Alpha. Alpha is a 7-week journey for those intentionally trying to find and investigate Jesus, and for the tools to share Christ with others. Now bring your friends, co-workers, neighbors, cousins, and acquaintances to help them hear about the good news and embrace Jesus. You heard about VLI? VLI is a 2-year academic program offering courses in biblical studies and theology, and was created to integrate hands-on training in ministry experience and spiritual formation. Become a more effective leader by increasing your biblical and practical knowledge. The next session begins on Monday, January 24th. That's about it for this week. Check us out online at canyonviewchurch.com. See you later. Hey, I'm done.
Oh, good job. See you next week.
Well, hello everybody. How's it going? You guys were singing tonight. That was awesome. I think God liked that. I did want to make a quick note about the youth work for Whiteout. There's a desk or a table that's set up right when you go out these main doors in the middle, and you can get signed up if you have some work that you'd like the youth to do, that you can give them a little money that goes towards their campership. So we invite you to check that out if you want to. The other thing is we are planning a tour of Israel in the fall in October. And if any of you have ever wanted to go to Israel and literally walk the places and the steps that Jesus walked, I really encourage you guys to consider going there. And the informational meeting is coming up. It's in your flyer, your brochure. It's got the information of when and where to meet for that. And I just invite you to consider that. It truly is life-changing to go to the Holy Land and just go on one of those tours. I can't say enough of how it deepens your faith, and you have a good time with the group you go with. So check that out, all right? Okay. Well, welcome to our second teaching on world religions and Jesus. And as we talked last week about Hinduism, I got a lot of great comments from people that it was really helpful for you to understand what the Hindus believe, and I think some people even felt that it helped them to understand why they are Christians and deepened their conviction that that is what they need to do. And that was my hope of what it would do. If you missed the message, you can check it out on our website, canyonviewchurch.com, or you can go to the bookstore and you can order either a CD or a DVD and go back over the message. Now, the book that we're using is also in the bookstore. It's Adam Hamilton's book, Christianity and World Religions, and that is the main resource that I'm using for my information. So if you're one of those guys that likes to see the things that you missed and study it even more, I really recommend this book. And I think he has done a very gracious job of comparing and contrasting the four main world religions and Christianity. The other thing I do want to make note of is a number of people have also come up to me and say, why aren't you doing a study on some of the other, like what is called cults, like Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, Christian Science? That actually is something that I'm thinking about doing next year. So keep coming, and in a year you'll get to that. And you'll just be so excited that you stuck around for that. Now, one of the thoughts that did come to my mind, and I don't know if you've ever kind of thought like this, and this is just kind of like how messed up I am. But I have had these thoughts that, what happens is if I study all these world religions and all of a sudden I realize, man, I've been in the wrong camp. And have you ever had that kind of a worry? Like, what happens if you get to the end of everything and you get to the end of your life and you realize, you mean being a Christian was wrong? Well, I think one of the things that this has helped me to come to a place of is really some comfort. As I study the other faiths and the other religions, I have come to a full understanding and a deeper conviction that following Jesus Christ and having my salvation in Him and Him alone is really not only something that gives me great comfort, but it makes sense. And I hope that you come to that point too. Now, 2 Corinthians 12:11, Paul does talk about him being a fool for Christ in the world's eyes. And I know that some of you, that you've kind of experienced that kind of reaction from people if you say, well, I'm a Christian, or I am looking into Christianity, or I'm choosing to follow Jesus now. You kind of get this look from people like, I thought you were a sane person. I thought you had a rational mind. What are you doing following this Christianity stuff? Have you ever had that kind of reaction from people? Well, I think that as we look at these different religions, the one thing that I keep coming back to is the reality that I've experienced Christ in my life, that I have seen the truths of the Scriptures, that God has proven them true to me over and over again. I have experienced the power of the kingdom of God in my life and experienced it and witnessed it in the lives of others as I've seen God heal people of things like cancer and various other diseases because of the reality that Jesus is the Son of God and that His kingdom has come and lives in us, because I've experienced it. I've experienced Christ with me as I've gone through various struggles, and I've had His Word bring incredible comfort into my life because it's life-giving. It's life itself. And so I keep coming back to that, and I just can't let go of that. So if some of you are kind of uncomfortable that we're studying these other religions and maybe even a little critical of that, I hope that you know that God is okay with it. He's secure in Himself. He's not threatened with it. And that God is going to reveal truth to all of us. I really do believe that. The other thing that I know is that many of us have been raised up in the church. And some of us may be raised up in the church and then kind of when you become adolescent, young adult, you kind of leave the church because it seems irrelevant to your life. And something happens, like maybe you have kids or you have a tragedy in your life, and something brings you back to church. And it's different for everybody. The one thing that I think will happen through this series is it will help you to kind of embrace the religion that maybe your parents or your grandparents had, where you see that there's truth here that I can embrace in my own heart. And that really is my desire, that everyone, at we come to the end of this 4 weeks, that you understand what Christianity is really supposed to be about. And it becomes relevant to you. It becomes something that you embrace in your own heart, instead of you're just doing it because your parents told you to do it. Now, as we go into this particular subject of Buddhism, this is something that has actually been very intriguing to me personally. Now, Nate Ralston and I kind of had this battle because he wanted to talk on Buddhism. But I says, I'm the boss, and I'm talking on Buddhism. And the one thing about Buddhism that you may not know is I was actually raised in a culturally Buddhist family. This may come as a shock to you, but I'm of Japanese descent. Some of you that, you just kind of a little slower to come to these kind of understandings. And so I was raised in a family that my grandmothers especially, were very devout Buddhists. And some of you grew up in homes where your grandmother was the really religious one in the family. Any of you have a family like that? Could be Catholic or Baptist or Pentecost or whatever, but it was grandma who was really driving religion in the home, right? So I had these very vivid memories of being a little boy, smaller than I am now, and I would go into Grandma's house, and she had this elaborate kind of display in her house that is called a botsudan. Anyone here of a botsudan? A couple of you are raising your hands. And what a botsudan is the Japanese have kind of incorporated ancestral worship into their Buddhist beliefs. And so you would have this real ornate kind of display, and there would be a thing that was made out of brass, or if you were wealthy, gold, and it would have like rice on it and an orange, and you're like praying to your ancestors, because the Japanese Buddhists believe in 4 levels of nirvana, and we'll get into nirvana, and they believe that when you pray at the botsudan, you're praying for your ancestors that have gone before you, that they would be able to obtain the next level of nirvana. At least that's what I was told. And so Grandma would make us put our hands together like this, and we would have these beads that we'd put around our hands, and we'd bow, and we'd say, Nami Amu Dabatsu. And that was a Buddhist prayer. It's kind of like our Amen. And what they say, what this Nami Amu Dabatsu means is, listen to this. It's as the living embodiment of the oneness of reality. Take that home and see what you think of that. So anyway, I would pray Namu Amu Dabutsu, and my grandma would go, oh, Jozu Kuksan, Jozu. And Jozu means very good, and they'd give me a piece of candy. So that's the only reason I did it, because I wanted a piece of candy. It didn't mean anything to me, and the only time we would go to the Buddhist church growing up is if there was a funeral, or a wedding, or some kind of festival, like the Obon Festival in Denver at the Japanese Buddhist church. Any of you ever go to the Obon Festival? No, but you're looking at me like, who is this guy? But this is my culture. This is what I was brought up with, but it was kind of one of those things that many of you may have experienced, that you were raised in the church, and you were taken to the church because your parents made you go, but you really didn't find it meaningful to you. You didn't really have any real experience like, oh man, this is the greatest thing in the world, and I've connected with God through this. It's just religion. You know what I mean? And that's what it was to me. Frankly, as we go into this study, one of the things that we'll see that becomes very clear is that the more we understand about the Christian faith, is it's not a religion. It's life. It's life. It's a relationship with Jesus Christ. And all of the trappings of religion is really not what he wanted us to have. He wanted us to have relationship with him. And that's what we'll get into. Now, to understand Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy, we have to go into the story of the Buddha. Now, the story of the Buddha is a guy by the name of Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama. And he was born in 563 BC in Nepal. And he was raised in a very wealthy family. His father was a prince of a small kingdom. And his mother died when he was born. And so his father, Siddhartha, was his father's only living family, and so he just lavished him with material possessions and also isolated him in their palace, that he didn't want his son to be exposed to any form of suffering, of human suffering. And so if you can imagine this young man growing up within the palace and never really being exposed to real life out in the world. He was married at 16, which was common in this culture. He had a son later. But at the age of 29, Siddhartha started struggling with that proverbial question that most of us should have negotiated if we're beyond 30 years old. It's that question of, who am I and what am I here for? It's what most of us have negotiated through adolescence in that separation, individuation process that human development people talk about. Well, at 29, Siddhartha was asking that question. And so he decided that he wanted to go explore the world. Because one of the things that Siddhartha was raised in was a Hindu world. In Nepal, it was the Hindu religion that he was raised with. And so to him, what he was taught and what was demonstrated to him was God was inaccessible to common man. The only way that a person could have any sense of accessibility to God was through the Brahmin priests that we talked about last week. And if you didn't hear that, you can go to the website or you can go get a CD or DVD on that. So anyway, as he grew up with this, there was this disillusionment within him with the Hindu religion because he had no connection with the Supreme Being, with God. And so these questions of life were things that kind of haunted him. And so the story goes that when he's 29 years old, he asked the driver of his father's chariot to take him out into the city. And as he goes out in the city, he notices a decrepit old man that's bent over at the waist and can barely walk. He had never seen anything like this. And he asked the driver, he said, "Is this the fate of all people?" And the driver answers, "Yes, Siddhartha, all of us grow old." This troubled him deeply because he had never seen an old person before, because his dad isolated him and protected him so much. And so he goes out a couple of days later. And as he goes out a couple of days later, he notices a man that is very ill. In fact, the man is so ill, he's near death. And as he notices this, again, something is troubled in his spirit. And he asks the chariot driver, "Is this the fate of all people?" And the chariot driver says, "Yes, all people suffer illness." And so what this developed in his heart, what the writers say, is it brought anxiety and despair in his heart. And so he goes out again, a third time. This time, as he's riding in the chariot, he sees a funeral procession. And as he sees this funeral procession, he sees the dead body. He had never seen a dead person before. And as he sees the dead body, again he asks, "Is this the fate of all?" And the driver says, "Yes, it is the fate of all people to die." I'm thinking that driver is probably going, "You idiot, of course we all die." But Siddhartha, being so lavished with this comfortable life and being so protected within his father's palace, he had never witnessed any form of human suffering. And so this led him to experience what most of us in this room have probably experienced at some point in our life. And for you younger folks, you will come to this at some point. This is what existentialists call the angst of life. This is where all of a sudden we realize that the penny kind of drops and we go, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And when we experience this existential angst in life, it creates anxiety in us. It creates fear of kind of like, what is to come of my life with this realization? And then we begin to notice that this experience of suffering is universal. Now, some of you, many of you in this room probably know of Steve Sanford. And Steve's been a member of this church for a number of years, and he's been diagnosed with cancer for the 4th time. And he's in Denver right now getting very intensive chemotherapy treatment, and they have him isolated in a room so that he can be protected from any infection, a disease, a sickness. And people have come up to me when they heard about Steve, and they say, how do you explain this? Where is God with Steve? Why is Steve suffering so much where others of us aren't? That's one of those questions of the angst of life. And I just said, I don't have any answers for that. I wish I did. And that is one of those things that someday when I get to sit face to face with Jesus, I'm going to say, what's up with that? So we don't have any answers to those kind of questions. And it creates angst within us of seeing a brother that we love suffer like that. And many of you have gone through this angst of life yourself, that you've had this diagnosis from a doctor that you have cancer or you have some other form of disease. And we kind of struggle with that question of what is to become of this? We have loved ones that we've lost. We've seen our loved ones suffer and then die. It's a hard one to deal with, isn't it? What kind of answers do we have to the questions that occur in our mind? Well, this is exactly what Siddhartha Gautama was struggling with in his life. And he couldn't find any solutions in Hinduism because God was inaccessible. It's interesting that as I studied this, then all of a sudden it dawned on me, no wonder my uncle's funeral was so horrible. Jane and I went to my uncle's funeral, and it was one of the worst experiences of our life, in all honesty. Not only were we sad that my uncle died, but to see the grieving and the utter despair in my aunt and her 2 daughters, the daughters of my uncle. You know why? When you understand and hear what the Buddhists believe, it was over. That they weren't going to see him again. There was absolutely no hope in that room. And I went to my mom, who is a pre-believer. And I said, Mom, will you give me permission, or will you please allow us to never have a Buddhist funeral for you? And she said, yeah, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to be gone. That's the way my mom is. But that experience to Jane and I was just one of the most uncomfortable, it was one of the saddest things that I've ever seen, to see that family suffering so greatly where they could have had hope. And that's one of the things that we'll get to that leads us to Christ. So Siddhartha, seeing all this suffering in life, he came up with this question is how do we live in a world with suffering, despair, and so much anxiety all around us? How do we come to any conclusions, and where do we find relief from that? And so, again, with his Hindu roots of seeing God as being inaccessible and not being able to connect with a God to give him any sense of hope, he goes the other extreme. And so what he chooses is a life of asceticism and a monastic life. He basically left home. He left his father's wealth, and he even, I think from what I'm reading, he left his wife and his son. And he went on this spiritual journey. And as he was traveling and he chose this life of asceticism, he still wasn't finding any relief from his anxiety with that. And so the story goes that 6 years into his journey, he's sitting under a tree. And as he's sitting under a tree and meditating, he goes into a trance. And as he goes into a trance, he saw the world in a way that he had never seen before. And when he awoke, he believed that he found the source of suffering and the path to overcome suffering. And a Buddhist priest said, this is where he found the ability to let go of all the things that lead to suffering. This is where he obtained, quote unquote, enlightenment. So the Pali word for enlight is Buddha, B-U-D-H. And so that's why he was given the name Buddha, the enlightened one. You see, you understand that? And so what his life then became was a life of teaching others his philosophical and meditative system to free human beings from suffering in this life and to deliver them from the prison of endless reincarnations. So again, he's incorporating some of the Hindu beliefs, but he's developing his own system of philosophy and life. Now, this is very important that we understand this. The Buddha never claimed to be God. In fact, the Buddha said, don't look at me as a God. God just gave me enlightenment to teach you how to be free from suffering and how to obtain freedom from the cycle of death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death, rebirth. And so some other beliefs like the Baha'i faith and even Hinduism have deified Buddha where that was never his intent. Now, what are the essential Buddhist beliefs now that we understood his story of how he came to develop this philosophy? First is the Four Noble Truths, that life is characterized by suffering that we talked about. The second thing is suffering is caused by attachments. And what he means by this is when we are attached to things of the world, suffering comes through that attachment. So, for instance, if I am attached to just life itself, what I suffer with of the fear of death is there because I'm holding on to life. But if I would lose that attachment, I wouldn't fear death anymore. You see the difference? If we are afraid of losing our children, that's because of your attachment to them. And so he prescribes being detached in a way that if you would lose them, you're not emotionally distraught. The third thing is that we can overcome our attachments, and this is through renunciation or through detachments. And ultimately, what he's saying is that when we lose our attachments, then we are free from that cycle of death, rebirth, and reincarnation. Now, it's really interesting because the New Age believers really are kind of fascinated by the whole issue of reincarnation. And it probably brings some hope that, when I die, I'm going to come back, and so we build up good karma, so I come back as a better person, right? But the reality is, when you study Hinduism and Buddhism, that's not what they want. They want to be free from it. They don't want to come back because, as Buddha is describing, coming back to this life is being brought back to a world of suffering. Why would we want to do that? And then the fourth thing